Before the discussion starts, I want to say I screwed up. I did my research. I showed up on time to record the upcoming conversation. I checked recording volumes for my co-host, but I really didn't check my own recording volume. Hence, the hiss that colors my pending vocals. An effort for you to hear my voice during the repartee of this episode. Then I thought, maybe I didn't screw up.
When I look back at it, and it's although from this perspective and many years after, I mean, it looks kind of rough and dangerous and all that sort of thing, and the way it was put over, but a lot of it happened.
Maybe the mistake and the hiss are in keeping with the spirit of this week's subject and his films.
A lot of what was going on there was reality. And maybe this is why the photographs are outside also, because I took all those photographs and many more before making the film. So that all that sort of research went into making the film and being part of it and seeing it. And although after we made the film, it was banned for nearly 2 years before we can get it out. And some of the critics, good critics, saw it, wrote about it, and then it was released.
Hello, listeners. This is Warren Wade Anderson,
Mark Barozzi,
Tony Sherry,
Reggie Valentin.
Welcome to the 5th episode of Antilles. The voice you just heard in the cold opening belongs to the pioneering filmmaker Horace Ove, OBE, Commander of the Order of the British Empire. Mr. Ove is a director of the groundbreaking film Pressure, the first Black British drama feature film. With that said, this Guinness World Record entry was not a designation he loved to embrace. Born on December 3rd, 1936, in the former British colony of Trinidad and Tobago, he spent his first 23 years in Trinidad's capital, Port of Spain. He grew up in an unconventional bohemian family that appears to have encouraged his rebellious artistic spirit. He fell in love with filmmaking through his love of painting shortly after he arrived in London at the age of 24. Before his death on September 16, 2023, he directed a number of cutting-edge TV shows, documentaries, feature films, and theatrical performances. As opposed to his older contemporaries, Cicely Tyson, Sidney Poitier, and Harry Belafonte, his contributions would not be widely appreciated in the United States until the 21st century, when British immigrants and their descendants began to see the power of his work. The ghost of Horace Ove can be seen in Raoul Peck's I'm Not Your Negro, Steve McQueen's Small Axe series, and Idris Elba's Yardie, among others. In our upcoming discussion, we'll focus on Ove's legacy through the frames of two films, Baldwin's Nigger and Pressure. Let's start with his first feature film, 1974's Pressure.
I was very impressed with the film. I guess I have a bit of a bias because I grew up with a lot of West Indian people, but you look at a movie like Cool Runnings or Still I Got a Groove Back, and you see the depictions of like those West Indians compared to like authentic West Indians, and I felt that it was a good depiction of what really was going on at that time. I felt the actors were great. There were a lot of times where when the mother was yelling at Anthony, I just felt like, my God, I was cringing a lot of times. That mother, man, she was something else, but she reminded me of my mom or my aunties or the elders in my family. So my first impression was I really enjoyed just peeking into what was going on at that time.
Yeah, so I second that. It was a lot of relating to what I've already seen. I could almost see some of my friends or people that in certain neighborhoods that I visited through the movie. And it was just another time for me to just see how it really was at that time, because you get to see why my connection was to see why a lot of the adults that I know or elderly people that I know are the way they are based on this movie. So it was just something just to add on to the portfolio of culture and characteristics that live within the culture from this movie.
Reginald?
I appreciated the authentic depiction of Caribbean life, either from the Trinidadians to the Jamaicans and whatever have you. Much better than what we have in movies today, where we see the Haitian guy that was depicted in Bad Boys 2.
Oh my God!
And
With a Jamaican accent?
With a Jamaican accent.
Tate Diggs and
or Tate Diggs still like how to group back. But it was authentic, and even though there were certain scenes where they were either overacted or whatever it was, but you felt the drama, you felt the again to echo that word again, the authenticity of it was felt, and even though it wasn't a big budget movie, but it was genuinely entertaining, thought provoking, and you look past the budget. And you appreciate
that
it.
That was distracting.
There wasn't one point where I was like, man, this is poor quality. I just considered the time.
Okay.
So I didn't even want. I was more into just the story.
Right.
So let's get into that then, because before we started, there's some conversations I had with you guys separately offline about the quality of the film. And you, Reginald, you were saying that it was hard for you to get into it because you're used to a certain quality. Am I putting words in your mouth?
It wasn't hard to get into, but you're mindful of it. Like, there are certain movies where the quality is so jarringly bad that it distracts you from engaging into the movie. And sometimes when you rewatch movies like that, you realize, boy, there was some good things there, but either the acting or whatever else that didn't make the movie work became a distraction. But this movie didn't have that, because you saw that there was the message that was being conveyed was well received for me. And I thought it was hilarious that the mother was just such a whiny she was almost a caricature of a West Indian woman, but they built her up as an archetypal typical Caribbean woman, just dialed up to like a high level. You know what I'm saying? Like, she was just like so whiny and
that scene after the cops raided the house.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it was hard to hear her. Like,
oh my God,
could you imagine that on repeat?
But I try to take it out of reality. There's pressure and scene pressure there. A lot of it is what I experience with different families and people and every sort of things. I know sometimes I show press and everybody, a younger generation is embarrassed about the mother and the way she acts, but she's a real West Indian woman. And women like her, from in that Windrush period that came here and was upset and screamed and cried, used to put them in a mental home at one time here and thought they were having a mental breakdown. They now discover after many years it's the right thing to do. Scream, cry, shout, and clear your head. And she was doing that. And I've known a lot of even black critics were very embarrassed. How could you show us like this? How could you do that? But she's real.
So, just based on that clip, what do you guys think about his response? Because you guys were bringing up the fact that she seems sort of like a caricature.
She wasn't, because I've been in so many scenarios in my own personal life with my parents where, something happens, you bring in reason, and they're more. I'm just thinking about that scene when the police raided the house and Anthony was trying to explain to the mother, like, we didn't do anything, they're just being racist, there's no place for black people here, and all she could think of is, I brought you here, I never had any problems as a black person here, you have this English education, you should be doing great, and it was like that battle between reason and
emotion.
Emotions, So even though it felt like a caricature, I've been in a thousand of those conversations with parents.
I have to agree. The character.
But what's the thing though? Why do you guys think it was caricature? Because I think you guys were saying that you thought it was over the top.
I think if you're looking at it from someone who was not raised by a West Indian person, you would condemn. That's like almost Medea, the way she was reacting. It was very it was very over the top.
I don't think that her portrayal of that character was off. It was just cringeworthy to admit that that's real. Okay,
because you recognize.
I recognize that. Although I can't say that my mom is 100% like that. I think that there are certain elements of what she's saying that rings true, but with balance, my mom doesn't mean for me to conform to the point where I lose my identity. I think she wants me to follow a certain set of rules, not lose who I am as a Haitian black man, but be wise in the choices that I make. And that's wise. I there's nothing wrong with that, you know. But certain things that she says, I hear the echoings of those things in my head, but not in the way. Like, I'm sure there are some Caribbean mothers that are exactly like that. They're so focused on towing the line that they forget who they are, and they want to so badly to assimilate to a white patriarchal society that they forget that, listen, your identity matters too. I know that exists, but to see it, and it was an onslaught, it was a bombardment of all these, you know, these sayings and these very typical lines that I've heard other people say. So it was condensed, it was packaged so it was so well packaged, right? It was digestible and it was immediately recognizable.
And even after her monologue, her posture in the chair, she was deflated. Her head was in her hand.
You've seen that.
Oh man, I've seen that so many times.
So I'm going to step back for the listeners and just describe the point of the movie. Here's my description here that I got from IMDb, and you guys can tell me if you think it's a good synopsis of the movie. A British-born younger son of an immigrant family from Trinidad finds himself adrift between two cultures. Mm-hmm. You think that captures the whole idea of the movie?
I think that's a good depiction. I think it's important to say the setting, like the time, like when.
Right, because it was done.
So that makes a difference.
Yeah, it was done in. It was a film that was. It was filmed in 1974, 20 years after the Windrush generation. The Windrush generation is basically after World War II in England. They asked the people of color from the colonies to come to England because there was a labor shortage. And it's now 20 or more years after the first immigrants started coming there, and they're facing kind of intransigence, like they're not being accepted in the culture, and this film is a kind of a representation of that. Let's get into the film a little bit. What do you guys thought about the way it started off with the postcard of the Caribbean house and the shoreline on the family on the ship deck, and then drawings of the Caribbean struggle in England? What do you guys think about that? And he goes to the shop where the father works.
Immediately, I had to pause the movie because I'm really into that music now, like the Pressure song.
Yes,
I love that music. I really do. That's like real cool vibes music. Nice. And then Horace, if you were to do a little research with Horace Ove, there's Horace Ove influenced, like it's not reggae at the time. That's not considered reggae, right? That's like more like ska.
It's kind of like ska. It's almost reggae because
It's right there. It's right there.
Reggae is coming out like right around that time that the film is released. Is right around the first reggae soundtrack, "The Harder They Come," is coming to the U.S. Yes.
Right. So I thought the music was dope. I liked the way it started. It set a nice tone.
Reginald?
It instantly gives you the impression that you're going to be immersed into something not typical, but something really cultural and intimate, right? I was ready for it. I mean, those images kind of got you prepared for a journey into a culture that someone who's not Caribbean is going to have to take, right? And I had the sense that immediately they weren't going to hold any punches. They were going to really show you and present to you a culture that's different from what the norm. I think up until that point, I don't think there's was a movie
No, that's the first.
like that.
That's the first.
Right. This is the first black British film ever made.
So you're
Feature film.
So you're used to looking at other images, other cultures.
You're used to looking at white people, the
White-
filter of white people to black people in England. Yes.
Right. And they pulled no punches. I mean, they showed you everything that's typical to, even down to the
Zabuka,
cuisine,
the-
the zabuka thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And that's
Thank you
a
for mentioning that.
Trinidadian word for avocado, which happens to be the Haitian
Creole,
Creole word for avocado, zabuka.
Right.
Thank you. I forgot to put that in my notes. Yeah.
Which I found to be so interesting. And I mean, that was by design.
Even from the beginning, when they showed the breakfast that is being cooked, you begin to see the conflict right at the beginning between their
Totally.
culture and the British culture. Because the boy wants to eat Tony wants to eat British food.
British.
And
Bacon,
they're
egg,
like,
and cheese.
no, you got to eat some Caribbean food. And even his older brother was like, you got to eat black man food for black men. You know, like.
I think food is a great way of showing a dynamic of culture, and I think that's what they were doing. They were separating Tony and the rest of the family.
Right.
Clearly, Tony was like the poor kid, and well, we say Tony, but usually they called him Anthony. Anthony was definitely the outlier because he was the one he was fully immersed in that culture. I mean, he had the British twang. And everybody, it's so crazy to see somebody so British and everybody else was so West Indian. It was that was an interesting dynamic.
So, what do you guys now think? I would start with Mark. Of him going on that job interview. From the beginning when he starts to enter the building. Because I had a similar experience to that when I went to England.
Seeing all the white.
Where...
Because
But I'll tell you more about it, but what do you think about it, Mark? What did you think about that experience? Like, from Anthony getting into the building, then being shown to the office, and then the interview.
First I'm going to say I automatically saw myself.
Explain.
I feel like this is what you want to get, right? I automatically saw myself because when you go for an interview and you're in a setting where there's not a lot of people who look like you there, a lot of times what happens is that people start to have their own conception as to what you're able to do, how you're going to sound, how you're going to behave, and all that kind of stuff. And it takes a strong-minded person to kind of be confident as to who they are. And I say that, and this is exactly what I mean. If you are strong in your Caribbean identity, you're strong in your British identity, you know what both of them are, and you balance those out, you're able to walk through situations like that a whole lot easier.
You've been very consistent throughout all the discussions we've had, which is basically your take is always
Self-determinism.
kind of like it doesn't matter what they do, I'll do what I'm going to do. It doesn't really matter. But
I think it mattered to Tony though. I think it affected Tony.
yeah,
It did.
It did.
But how could it not? Because that's what I'm trying to get at is like, I'll ask you, what did you think about that whole kind of from him first entering the building to him getting to the office and the interview?
It dashed his conception of what playing ball should be like, or is it even worth playing ball, or is there a positive outcome to be had conforming in the way where even his mom was trying to tell him later on in the movie, that's the problem with you young people, you guys want to give up. You know, I had to struggle when I came here. You guys are so quick to give up. You know, this was him balancing what his brother was telling him about how society works versus his idealism.
Right. His brother was telling him that he will never be accepted.
Right.
So he needs to be part of the Black Power movement.
Black Power movement, right.
Yeah.
And then I think he was also conflicted because he grew up, like, look at his crew, his friends, his peers.
Right. His peers are white
Yeah.
and British. But what I'm trying to get at is, because this is what I felt, and I guess this is where I jump off from the movie into my own reality, which is when I was in England, just because I had this notion that that's where I should do architecture, I went on an interview and got into the interview, got into the lobby, and the receptionist said to me, very much like in the movie, like the security guard was like, who are you? Like, like I'm the person for the interview. hesitated, and then being brought into the interview and then being condescended to. Having statements said to me like, "Oh wow, you actually do real drawings,"
Right.
Oh
God.
in the same way, like in that particular interview, the interviewer said to him, "Have you been involved with the police?" Which is not an interview question, and was surprised to learn that he was not involved with the police, and then spoke to him, even though he spoke in a British accent, he didn't hear. It's almost as if he didn't see Anthony at all.
No,
He saw
color.
He just saw the color and what's supposed to be there,
Right.
and he didn't see the person at all.
One of the characters in the movie nailed it when she said in her speech, Louise, she said
That was the American?
the Americans, she said that speaking truthfully and clearly helps society deal with problems from a position of clarity and not misunderstanding. That's me paraphrasing it. But we're not honest in society about how we should treat one another, and we have a lot of misunderstandings and stereotypes that really hurt the relationships that we ought to have with one another. And that hurts race relationships more than anything. And these things are being depicted in movies, in music, and other cultures are consuming this, thinking that's the way that everyone within that demographic or that culture
One broad.
is, right. And that's part of the reason why that is a problem, is because we don't, and I've mentioned this before, is we don't really know one another like intimately. Or there's
You talking about Caribbean people or just people in general?
people in general.
Different people.
Different people don't really interact with one another the way they should to know whether or not a black person or Asian person really behaves a certain way other than what is being portrayed in,
A blockbuster movie.
Right. And no knock necessarily on movies per se, because we have to take that with a grain of salt as entertainment.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I was thinking about this. I think I might have mentioned it to you guys. Movies are what taught me how to be American. So I take movies more seriously than a lot of people do.
Right. No, but what I'm saying, I don't want to handcuff the creative process for a lot of people.
Got it.
So I do understand that there's a place for entertainment and exaggeration, but I do think that it's responsibility of movie houses and even producers of movies to also depict authentic movies about cultures, just like Horace Ove did with Pressure. Because that way, someone who doesn't have the access to an Asian person or an Asian person could understand, wow, you knowing this information about architecture and about art shouldn't sound foreign to a white person. It's because he watches Juice and he thinks that that's the way that
all black people are.
Reginald Valentin is. When meeting me, until I open my mouth and I speak with him, and he'll realize that, oh, you're more complex. And by complex, normal. Like, they call you complex. It's another word for exotic.
It's funny you say
that.
Right.
I'm normal. I'm not I'm freaking normal. I'm just like you. You're complex. It's like, wait, I'm complex.
It's funny. Another office situation from a colleague of mine who is from Antigua, and she speaking to someone, and her boss in the office, and she'd been working there for years. He goes, "Look, where are you from?" She goes, "From the West Indies." He goes, "Dot or feather?"
What?
Damn.
This is in the 2000s. This didn't happen in 1960.
That's terrible. That's terrible. How'd you respond to that?
I didn't respond to that. It was directed at her. I wasn't there. She told me about that.
Sorry.
Yo, that is.
I wish our audience could see Warren's face when he said that.
I don't want to fast forward at all, but when Reginald was speaking, it reminded me of that question. I know we're going to transition eventually to Baldwin's Nigger. But in
I
that,
like how you said that. You say it so academically and
It's
intellectually.
correct. Yeah, it's correct.
Baldwin's nigger.
It's nigger. It's an exceptional word everywhere.
when that, I don't know if you guys remember when they were asking Baldwin questions.
About white liberals.
Yes, about white liberals, and at that time in the '60s, how passionately he answered that we don't need white liberals for
We'll
our
get into
cause.
that. We'll get into
But that's what when Reginald was speaking, that kind of reminded
Here's
me. of
another
that.
quote or another line that was delivered by another line that was delivered by a character who I don't remember his name, but he was the guy with the weed and the the Jamaican guy with the weed.
It's such an uncommon thing.
Right.
It's so uncommon.
So Tony made a comment about how we should hate all white people, and he was talking to Junior Anthony. Right?
Yes, Anthony, the fictional character in the movie.
Right. And he was talking about how we're all in this together, right? White people, black people, we're all struggling to make it, right? And so us hating white people generally isn't going to help us get out of this situation, because you have white people that are also being oppressed by white people. Like the system itself, capitalism,
Yep.
is really the problem.
Yes.
Right.
Right?
In the film, there's a scene where he's walking out with that girl, and
Oh yeah.
and she doesn't realize the precarious situation that she's in also until she brings him home, and the landlady's sort of
She's like, chill.
she's like, he needs to get out of here, when she thought she had a great relationship with the landlady, and realized like, no, there's this whole kind of prejudice that you're not even aware of, that even when you're in your ignorance, it still affects you as a white person.
And which is a good segue for what the man with the spliff so eloquently said. He said that there's really no difference between the difference between the black man and the white man is that the black man recognizes the bars. He knows the bars. He sees
The confinement.
The confinement, right?
A lot of my friends at that time in the film business, and who I went to film school with, and who we came together, and I just do. And the majority of them were white filmmakers who, was part of that whole 60s politics and understand it and knew it and things, got together with me and said, all right, we'll give you 4 to 5 weeks to shoot it. Let's go for it. After that, we got to go on to other films that earn some money.
That brought up something that I thought about, which relates to the theme and the title of this movie, Pressure. So you're looking at the pressure of being in the middle class. Like you're right in the middle of 2 points of pressure. Not falling in the bottom and rising to the top. And that's squeezing the middle class to the point where...
And there's a pressure of Anthony too, which is like
Fitting him.
He wants to make his mother proud,
Right.
but he doesn't know how to do it because he doesn't have the tools to.
And you have the pressure of white supremacy bumping up against this sense of black power that we ought to have, right?
As represented by his
black
brother.
pride, right? So you had this pressure, and you try to navigate that in a system that regards you as someone who is lesser than, and that pressure could be debilitating.
Yeah.
Some people decide to take the road of the coon. And some people decide to take the road of the super
Militant.
black power militant
Provocateur.
And some people are just apathetic, and they think, they're like, I'm not going to take a side either
or
way.
like the mother, which is basically, I'm going to work hard.
Right.
I try and work as hard as possible. I'm trying to be part of the middle class. I'm told that this is how I play the rules. I'm going to continue down this path, but I'm not sure. And I thought when I played the rules, you, Anthony, would be able to benefit from it. But
when you do
can't
that,
see
you're
it.
supporting the system of white supremacy,
Yep.
because that's what they want. They want you to
Be a good dog.
want to be a good lad. Like, see how they raided the place? They raided the
the mother's, the
the
parents'
meeting
house.
Even the meeting,
right? The Black Power,
the Black Power meeting, and they took all the troublemakers and then they isolated Anthony and
tried to have him sort of
rat out
his own brother.
You're a good lad. They want you to be a good lad. They want you to be a good lad how they perceive Anthony, and they want you to be a good lad as how Anthony's mother is, who bought into this whole system. Lock, stock, and barrel.
Obviously, if he's born out there, she bought into it.
No, that's their perception.
Right.
I mean, there's an evolution to Anthony.
Of course.
But and it's funny, just from the way he's dressed, they could tell that he's not one of them. Because everybody in that meeting had that necklace.
Right.
And they had a certain swag.
Mm-hmm. The Black Power sort of garb.
Right. The black... So
Army jacket, beret.
Right. So they were able to single him out and think that he could be the informant or whatever. So that's the pressure of being a black man in the Western world.
Right. The question I was going to ask you guys is, what did you think about that scene where Anthony meets up with his friends and they go into the store? What do you guys think about that particular scene?
I could start with Anthony's response because I've been in those situations where you're caught up with the wrong crowd.
Is it that they're the wrong crowd, or is it? I mean, to
I
a
think
certain extent that they are the wrong crowd.
I think it was wrong for Anthony. For Anthony because what we haven't spoken about was.
Well, so for the listeners, who are these friends? Are they're directly from the Caribbean?
Ruffians.
Yeah.
They it's almost as if to use the stereotype, they just came off the boat.
Yeah, they sure did. And I believe what we haven't spoken about yet about Anthony's character, he's still pretty green. He hasn't picked.
He's very naive.
He's very naive. He hasn't picked a side. And real talk, the dude is British. There's nothing Trinidadian about him.
Right.
He's all British.
And that's what his parents brought him up to be.
Yeah, messed up. That's wrong.
Right.
That's wrong. Because even for myself, I kind of relate to that as well because I didn't know I wasn't Haitian enough until I met people like Reginald and Francois. Because they came in. My parents did not inundate me in the culture. They were very conservative. And for some reason, they didn't speak the language. I mean, all I knew was the food, but they didn't speak the language. I didn't know the music or the culture. It wasn't until Reginald, really, I started speaking the language and all that. So I could relate to that because I don't think Anthony had any connection to his ancestry.
Right, he'd never been to Trinidad or...
No. Which there's pressure there too because now for me, there are times where I'll connect. There's some times where I have to deal with Haitian clients or parents who are Haitian.
And they break out into full...
patois, and then my patois is not bad, but they say my lung win lou. It's I have a heavy accent. Mm-hmm. So even for myself, I feel bad for not being. I'll get through a conversation and communication will be effective, but I wish I could speak fluent, which I don't think I speak fluent Creole. I understand it, I could read it, but I get that tap. Parle anglais. Who made parle anglais?
Yeah, you speak English.
Go ahead and speak English, bro. Yeah, you're good. I get the tap all the time.
That's a silent insult.
So I can relate to Anthony, man, because I think his parents, and they didn't know any better because it mirrors what our parents did. I remember in the 70s, the school system told our parents not to speak Creole to us because it would make us slower in school.
Less American too.
Yeah, but our parents were afraid that if Creole was our first language, that we would struggle in school, which is the exact opposite.
Yes.
This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Double Bill Movies, a book club for movies. Watch 2 movies and join us to talk about it. A forum for avid and casual movie watchers to discuss how this medium shapes the way we see the world around us. Go to doublebillmovies.com for more details. Okay, let's talk about Ove's documentary, Baldwin's Nigger.
A short film, also by Ove, It was done in 1968, and it starts
It's a
off
great year.
with the name of the documentary, and it starts off with it's basically a town hall meeting.
Yep. Conversation.
Very much reminiscent of the town hall that he would recreate in Pressure, in which it's kind of like it's a short documentary in which James Baldwin and Dick Gregory are speaking to West Indians in sort of West Indian Hall. And
so dope.
he starts off with the story of Baldwin starts off with the story of being in the British Museum, and someone who's Caribbean in the British Museum said to him,
Negro.
"Who are your people?"
Yeah.
And he couldn't answer that question. The way he answered it is like, "I'm from."
Like, where you from? Like, where you from?
Like, where you from? And he tried to say, "Well, I'm from
Alabama,
Carolina, I'm from the South." And he's like, "No. Where are your people from?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "I don't know. I know that my forefathers came here, and I was taken as a slave, and the guy, the master who took us as a slave, his name is Baldwin, and I'm Baldwin's nigger." And I wanted to ask you guys about that particular opening, and do you think that rang true to how Caribbean people see themselves versus Americans?
What kind of Americans?
You want African Americans versus Caribbean?
African Americans, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, and this is gonna sound harsh. Outside of like other Caribbean folks who kind of already are in the know of the lay of the land of the West Indies, I never got a question from like any of my white counterparts or cared about where I'm from. I never heard that. I never get that. Where your family from? I never get that from.
No. The question I'm asking is, do you think that Baldwin's representation, as far as Caribbean person, black person to black person, a Caribbean person speaking to another black
Okay, I see
person,
what you're saying.
Yeah.
It is different. It is different. If I understand your question, you're trying to find out the difference between ancestry of like an African American compared to like a Caribbean American.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we stopped. We made a stop before we came here, and we have more history. We have more history.
Well, I don't know if it's more history of a different history. Right?
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. It is definitely a different history.
No, there's also more.
Okay, explain.
In the sense that in America
They were stifled more.
they were stifled more, and as
The
far
slavery
as
was more oppressive.
it was more, but it lasted longer.
That's true.
It lasted longer, and there's an issue where you have people that really can't trace back their history as far as some Caribbean people can. Like, for example, my family line in terms of from my mother's side, I mean, they're very proud of their history. And
What's your mother's maiden name?
Baudry.
That's right. That's yeah.
Baudry.
Yeah.
So my mom used to always talk to my grandfather, who was also proud of his father and his father before him, that they were very, very well-to-do people who. My grandfather was very proud of the fact that his father was the first person in his town to own a car. Like, people was driving horse and carriage. And he was the first person to.
Also, it's like 1920s, almost probably.
Yeah, before. It's before that.
Before
So
that,
my grandfather was born in 1918.
Yeah.
And so his father.
Okay, so it's about 18 late.
He saw the evolution of technology just rapidly change, and then
Makes
and
sense.
he knew that, and he could trace back his land ownership history.
He lived through the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, he traced it back to 1804, 1805. He could trace it back that far back.
Right.
I don't remember the names of my forefathers like that, but that's something that especially my mother's side of the family, was always proud to talk about.
So you're saying that a Baldwin or people like Baldwin can't do that?
They might be able to. I'm
It's
sure
difficult.
It's difficult
because when you, especially if you know, for listeners who might have watched Finding Your Roots, it's difficult because when they go back and look at their ancestries, it's usually like a number or just a male or female. They were seen as property. So sometimes there wasn't even the name of a person.
And there's no story attached to that other than the fact that you were property. So if there's any good story to share with your children, it probably started mid 20th century or early 20th century. Because before that, like, what history can you say, can you really share with your children other than your grandfather was a sharecropper or a slave? Like, that's the story. And I'm not saying that to disparage anybody.
About overcoming,
right. My story was different. And then where I could, of course, there was slavery. I mean, my great grandfather fought for, in the revolution.
Wow.
Yeah, but after that, I have more generational examples where I could draw from where there's a positive story to be told. And I don't think that other people have that. And I wish I could trace it further back than that, like my Chinese brothers and sisters who could talk about Ming Dynasty or whatever. They could go back.
They could go back to the 10th century.
Yeah, I can't do that.
Right.
I can't do that.
That's a damn shame.
Ancestry.com doesn't go that far back. As a matter of fact, I don't even know how Ancestry.com works in Haiti. I don't know if they have the type of record keeping
accurate.
that I would. But thank God for the oral history that my mom and my grandfather and my
If you go back there, you could there's probably records you could find if you dig hard enough. But I hear what you're saying. So let me get back to the film. So what did you guys think about, because the camera panned into the audience of all these different Caribbean people, and there was a kind of mix of people that were there.
Yes.
Were you guys kind of a little bit, how did you guys feel about that?
My first impression, first of all, it was weird because even though this was, when was this recorded?
68.
Okay, so we're talking about over 50 years ago. For me, it aged very well. I'm so happy that Ove captured that town hall because it just gave you a good implication of how hungry that group was. The same way we were hungry in the civil rights movement in this country. People were just hungry for truth. They were hungry to, validated, their feelings to be validated. I mean, like, anytime anybody said like a certain word, people were like, yeah, the way they responded to it. I thought it was pretty cool.
Even the fact that there are people sort of openly smoking weed in the audience, and now weed is kind of legal in New York. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was cool, man. I thought it was a great idea, and he has some iconic photos too. I learned that Ove's a photographer, so Carmichael and having Baldwin there.
Stokely Carmichael.
Stokely. I mean, that's crazy. That's like the
awesome
equivalent.
Dude.
That's like Mount Rushmore. That's like the equivalent of when Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X and Sam Cooke were all together. That's like the same stuff. Dope.
You were going to say something, Reginald?
No, they were talking about some really provocative and stuff that's relevant today. Like, just because we've had some changes in statutes and laws and things like that, the fact that the perception of black people hasn't really changed as much. I mean, it has changed to a certain degree, but I think we still have problems where
we're more docile now. We're more inundated. We're more integrated, I feel.
Well, what happened was, as a result of the civil rights movement there in England and here, is that it's almost as if there was a gate, like a fort.
Yeah.
And then they let us into the outer rim of the fort. And then let us feel like, well, you're in the fort.
Right, exactly.
But you still can't get access to the center of the fort.
Right.
And
you're in the courtyard.
Right.
Yeah,
and they're mad. They're mad because now we're asking for more. We're requiring more.
That's what I was gonna go.
And it's not even more.
Yeah.
It's not even more. What's more? It's ours. We live here too.
Yes.
So that's why it feels the way it feels to you in terms of it's still, it feels relevant. It feels fresh.
Yeah.
That's partly because after that many years, we're still talking about the same thing. Why?
Yeah.
Like, why are we talking about the same thing?
Yeah. Like, for instance, I like the questions that, he makes his presentation and then people start asking questions. And one of the questions that someone asked is, can white liberals help the Black Power movement?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then his response is like,
Nope.
white liberal equals white missionary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Liberal unable to examine their history versus Black people questioning the dominant narrative. What do you guys think about the engagement of the audience? Do you think that the audience were... Did you think that the audience were fully engaged? Do you think the audience were understanding their place in that particular time?
I do.
By their questions?
By their questions. It's almost like they wanted Dick Gregory and James Baldwin to answer like certain big existential questions like right then and there. Like they were like, harbingers of a better future for them. And Baldwin was like, dude, I'm trying to figure things out just like you are. Like, like somebody asked, oh, why do you call yourself Negro? Why do you call yourself Negro? You're black. Like,
yes.
Dude, I'm from a society where that's the name that is ascribed to me. I can't change my vocabulary overnight. And while we're stuck on vocabulary, like, you're a Negro, like I'm not going to change my vocabulary. And I'm not going to expect you to change your perception overnight either. But we have to tackle bigger problems than nomenclature.
Right.
You guys remember that woman? There was a woman that had a very interesting question. Do you guys remember that woman's question? Because she got a response from the audience when she was talking about we're separated by skin tone.
She's talking about she didn't know she was a Negro until she came.
That's right.
To England.
Because she was from Jamaica.
When she was from Jamaica, she was part of a cosmopolitan.
Yes.
You can tell she was kind of like bougie.
Yes, she was highfalutin.
Right, and so she was saying that how coming to England made her recognize that she's a Negro, whereas
very much like the mother from Pressure.
And so there she hinted at colorism being the problem in Jamaica over anything else.
She didn't know she was black until she got...
The shade issue.
Do you think that they raised those questions to kind of let the African Americans who live in U.S. kind of understand that they have an advantage and maybe they haven't used it as well as they should?
Not 1990, not no.
People,
68.
I mean, you're posing. I think I see where you're going with this, but I think
I'm just putting it out there. I'm not saying that's what I believe.
I think they were there because they've heard of James Baldwin, and
that was a big deal. Him coming over,
right? And because America is very good at advertising themselves, they're there to get genuine answers to their questions because they're in their struggle as depicted in Pressure, where they're working hard just to keep to make ends meet, keep a roof over their heads, and they just want to know, are things going to get better?
Right.
I mean, I think that's basically it. What other impressions you guys had of that film?
I think Mark brings up a good point. I didn't get a good understanding of the dynamic between British blacks and American blacks, or maybe they didn't see each other as different because they were dealing with the same stuff.
I think
I felt like there was a unity there. I didn't feel like there was like a you're American, we're British type of thing.
Right.
I didn't get that.
Well, there was some slight misunderstandings that they were trying to clarify with the questions that they were posing. Like the guy that was asking about the Negro terminology versus black. I think they were trying to understand culturally what the differences are. But intellectually, fundamentally, they were on the same page.
This episode of Antilles was moderated and produced by Tony Sherry, Reginald Valentine,
Mark Barozzi, and myself. The audio clips of Horace Ove throughout this episode were taken from the June 4th, 2017 episode of Screen Talks Archive podcasts. Go to barbican.org.uk for the complete interview. Next week, Delroy Lindo, through the lens of Paul Morrison's Wondrous Oblivion and Lasse Holström's Cider House Rules. Thank you for listening to Antilles.